Should you be concerned that your property is at risk? I'm your host, Bonita Cornute. In a minute, we'll tell you why you should be concerned.
Did you know everyone in the St. Louis area lives in a flood zone? Not a floodplain, but a flood zone, an area where there's either low, moderate, or high risk of flooding. Learn about your zone and understand your risk at knowyourzone.org.
I would say the wonderful thing about Dr. Joe is I don't think he's any set person's type of provider. I think he is the type of provider where he lets the parents kind of guide, where they want to go with the appointment or with their child and those types of decisions. So he's your thought partner, right? And he's not going to push what he thinks. He really meets you where you are, and it's wonderful.
St. Louis, amazingly, is a very, very diverse community. It is not obvious when you look at it, but there are people from at least 94. There are about 94 different communities from around the world that are living in St. Louis. It's a very
990 homes in St. Charles County were damaged in a flash flood in 2019. We saw floating cars and water-filled basements. Years earlier, 300 homes in University City were destroyed by torrential rains. National Weather Service senior hydrologist Mark Fuchs will explain why flooding has become such a tremendous problem. Back in a minute.
We watched our friend be afraid and be fierce and be brave and have to do things and confront his government in these agencies and call out lies. It's not something he ever thought he'd have to do in his life. And for me, knowing that he passed away suddenly, I feel like this robbed him of more than just his life. It robbed him of peace.
Have you heard the news? Everyone in the St. Louis region lives in a flood zone, not a floodplain, but a flood zone, an area where there's either a low, moderate, or high risk of flooding, and not just from rivers. Heavy rain can be enough. And get this, most homeowners' policies don't cover flood damage, which means on average, $35,000 coming out of your pocket. Learn about your zone, understand your risk, and make an informed decision about protecting your home. KnowYourZone.org.
Mark, what is going on? Why do we see such flooding here in the region? I'm talking about St. Charles, St. Louis City, University City had a major flooding incident. What's happening?
We're getting a lot of heavy rain events. and many of these events are happening over very short periods of time. Last year's 2022 July 26th event, case in point, very heavy rain, and a lot of it happened over the suburban area that is St. Louis County and St. Charles County and into the east side as well. You get very heavy rain over a short period of time. It doesn't matter how dry your soil is because we have so much of what we call impervious soil. That would be the roads, the parking lots, the roofs. Water falls on all that and goes into gutters and then out into storm drains, and all of a sudden, if you get that much water collecting in one spot, your sewage system is going to be overtaxed.
And that was like a foot of water, a foot of rain?
It's actually more than a foot. We had, in one place in St. Charles County, we had an observer near the 370 intersection in St. Charles report 14.69 inches of rain, and most of that fell in 6 hours.
That's a lot.
Yes.
And for that reason, people need to understand that they must prepare.
Absolutely.
And what can the average person do to address this?
Not just the average person, but society in general, all the entities that try to mitigate flooding. We need to be more aware of what our atmosphere can produce. And we're seeing glimpses of it here and there. We had very heavy rain events in the not too distant past in Jefferson City, not too far from Herman. That particular event raised rivers on the Missouri River, a big river. I can't remember the number now.
Yeah, but it was a lot.
It jumped up, and the Missouri River just doesn't do that very often.
Did you know 1 out of every 5 flood insurance claims comes from an area not considered at high risk for flooding, and that the average flood damage claim is about $35,000? Learn about your zone and understand your risk at knowyourzone.org.
Hello, my name is Pastor Richard Ashley. I'd like to welcome you to St. Philip's Evangelical Lutheran Church, 2424 Annie Malone Drive in the Ville. All are welcome. We think of ourselves as authentically Lutheran and genuinely African American.
Wearing your hair like that, what makes black hair unique?
I love black hair because we can do so much with it. We can wear it straight, we can wear it twisted, we can wear it kinky. You know, we can wear any styles, and it looks good on us, and I love it.
Why are we seeing more rainfall?
That's a great question. It's a combination of factors. I mean, we definitely have warming temperatures aloft and at the surface, but you have warmer temperatures that tends to give the atmosphere the ability to hold more moisture and gives the atmosphere an opportunity to produce these heavy rainfall events when everything else comes into place. That hadn't always been the case. We've always seen these heavy events throughout our history, but not as frequently as we're seeing these days.
And is it connected to global warming? I mean, some people would say that, but really, I don't know what you think as a true expert in this field.
Well, I don't know about being a true expert. From what I've seen here in my time in St. Louis over the last 16 years, we've had a lot of very heavy rain events. Climate change certainly could be playing a role in what we're seeing.
Well, you know, it's been about 3 decades since we saw the flood of 1993, and that did some heavy damage throughout the region. What did we learn from that experience and some of these other major flooding events?
I think we learned a lot. We learned our roads could be built a little higher. We learned not to build quite so close to the river, you know, businesses and homes. And we learned how to recover, you know. And in that recovery, we did build things higher. We did raise roads. We learned a lot about our atmosphere. We're learning more about that, you know, and the potential of another 1993 happening. And it, make no mistake about it, it will happen again. It's just a matter of when.
Really?
Certainly.
Gutters, ditches, creeks, streams, low spots, high spots, gentle slopes, rolling hills, new roads, new neighbors, new stores, new parking lots. Everything around us influences our flood risk. Know your risk. Know your zone. Knowyourzone.org.
When I bought the house, I was in a 100-year flood zone. So I said, I can work with this because I really like the house and I really like the neighborhood. With the very first flood that I experienced, the people in the neighborhood said, we have never seen anything like this. University City is a city where everyone, it doesn't matter your race, it doesn't matter what you do for a living, none of that matters. We're all University City. And that's what I look for when I am putting down roots, a neighborhood. I dealt with 5 different floods. The most severe one was Hurricane Ike. The water came from 2 directions. Out of the River des Peres, that water was up and coming this way. It was raining so hard, it couldn't go down the drain. Within 10 minutes, it starts coming and it's rushing. And I'm rushing to gather things to get out. And it was a flash flood. It was gone in 30 minutes, but the damage was done.
In the floodplain management world, we have a saying, and that is, where it can rain, it can flood. One of the factors that causes increased flooding is development. Areas that once were pervious surfaces where the water soaks naturally into the ground, it's now in an impervious surface.
Because we have the Missouri River, we have the Mississippi River, and all of the tributaries, there is a higher risk of flooding in this metropolitan area.
Those that have an NFIP flood insurance policy, that's a very good thing because people can get back to their lives faster.
Flood insurance gave me an opportunity to stay in the city that I love. The buyout allowed me to put a good-sized down payment on a new home.
I think homeowners, until they have been through a flooding event, they just don't take flooding seriously.
There are more hurricanes, more tornadoes, so it's all real. And I know you think it's not going to happen to you, but it can. Without the flood insurance, I would be financially bankrupt. It will protect you, your family, protect what you've built.
You know what I remember about the 1993 floods was the site of those levees the breaches.
Right.
Have we done anything to improve the construction of the levees, or?
I don't think the levee breaches had anything to do with faulty construction necessarily.
Okay.
Maybe in some cases, sure, but levees are only protective to a certain height. When it gets to the top of that protection level, the top of the levee or near it, if there's any weakness at all in the levee, it's going to find a way to get through it and cause that breach. We saw that in '93, we saw it in 2008, we saw it in 2019, over and over again. When water gets close to that height, your levee's in dire straits.
And we can't build them higher?
We could, but that also causes problems.
Oh.
There's a controversy going on up into northeast Missouri and west central Illinois, where the folks on the Illinois side, the Sinai levee district, had the funding to build their levee higher than they had it before. There was controversy and debate as to whether or not that height was authorized with the levee, but the folks on the other side of the river didn't have the funding to equal that height. So whatever height they were protected to didn't help the folks out on the other side of on the Missouri side of the river. So there's a lot of debate going on with that.
Talking and communicating and working together is probably another thing that communities need to do in order to address the damage that can occur.
It has to be done collaboratively, collectively, taking into account all interests at hand. You can't just go out and say, well, I'm going to protect my property, I'm not worried about yours. You gotta do it with sensitivity toward the whole region, because the water's got to go somewhere.
Is it possible to consider the fact that maybe some homes that we saw damaged in the past should never have been built where they were located?
You could say that perhaps, but the problem with that is that when those homes were built, the engineers that constructed that or constructed culverts built to a certain understanding of the frequency of these heavy rainfall events, or the height the water would get to over time if it's a 1% average exceedance probability, et cetera. If it's a 0.2%, which would be the equivalent of what we used to call a 500-year flood, we don't use that terminology anymore because people get confused by that. People used to think that,
it'll be another 488 years before.
Exactly. And that's not at all what it means. It means in any given year, you have a 0.2% chance of the river getting to that height. It could happen 2 or 3 times in the same year. And it might not happen for a couple thousand years. It's not quite what that terminology means. So we're using the annual exceedance probability as a better metric of communicating to the public what that actually means.
Should the public be concerned about their property in the 5-10 years from now?
Sure. They should be, especially if they're built in a floodplain or near a floodplain. They need to understand what the risks are and whether their property is safe from especially flash flooding, which can come up very quickly near a small stream.
That means what? Just explain.
A flash flood versus a regular flood?
Yes.
The flood of '93 was a regular flood, right? It took a long time for the Mississippi to go up and down. The flood of last July was a flash flood. The rain happened in a very, very quick, less than 6 hours time frame, and that actually is our Weather Service definition of a flash flood. Any flood that takes place within 6 hours of the causative event, in other words, the rain. But because of all the impervious soil that we have throughout the metro St. Louis area, any heavy rain event is going to cause that potential of a fast rise in your local streams.
And people need to be very mindful of those flash floods.
Absolutely.
Because that could take you out in a flash if you're on the road or if you're outside in the wrong place. How do you know if you are in a floodplain? I mean, how do I find that out and prepare?
FEMA puts out flood frequency maps, and it tells you what flood zone you would be in, or if you're even in one at all. If you're built on top of a plateau or a hill, you may be fine. But folks that are built near creeks or ditches or whatnot, you got to take a look at that and see how high you are protected too.
Well, I guess then the last question would be, what does the future hold? What should we be looking to or preparing for, understanding?
Well, I think you actually said it earlier, preparedness. We need, and this is from a community-based perspective, from an individual-based perspective, we all need to understand that these events aren't going away. They're going to continue happening, perhaps at a higher frequency than we've seen in the past, and we need to be ready for that potential.
Flooding. It's the most common and most expensive natural disaster in the United States, and flood risk varies no matter where you live. FEMA has spent decades investing in high-quality mapping data to help inform flood risk and set flood insurance rates. Today, we're leveraging that data along with cutting-edge technology to get a better understanding of your property's unique flood risk and how that risk can be reflected in the cost of your insurance. FEMA will consider your home's distance to a flooding source, the types and frequency of flooding, and property characteristics such as the cost to rebuild. With more data going into assessing your flood risk, you'll have a more complete picture of what goes into the cost of your flood insurance. We're making flood insurance fairer and easier to understand to help you protect the life you've built. Learn more about this effort and the benefits of flood insurance by visiting FEMA.gov/NFIP transformation.
If it rains where you live, it can flood where you live. Know your risk. Know your zone. KnowYourZone.org.
Mark, thank you so much for all of your time and the information. It certainly is helpful. St. Louis is surrounded by water, but that does not mean that it should control us. Be proactive and secure your property. I'm your host, Bonita Cornute. Thank you for watching The Open Source. We'll see you again soon.